Anyone who's looked for a recipe online will tell you that it is painful to have to sift through someone's 3-page life story just to find a recipe, but this recipe story is worth reading. Reddit user Near Kilroy posted this recipe to r/old recipes. It's for Scotch cookies. It was posted with the caption, "Was looking into a murder that took place in my house and fell down a rabbit hole. Found out that the neighbor at the time, 1930s, worked in a bakery and that this was their recipe of the year." These cookies were quickly nicknamed within the subreddit as murder cookies. They were posted all over. I reached out to Near Kilroy for more details on the story of the murder, and this is what they had found. "I live in a very old house with very weird characteristics. There's a trapdoor under our living room carpet, random photos of Jesus throughout the basement, and a large knife sitting on a carpenter's table in the basement that none of us dare disturb. We became curious about the prior owners and looked them up. We found out a youngish couple lived here with their 2 children. Also listed in the phone book was their neighbor, the owner of a local bakery, so we read into both of them. Both the wife, husband, and their 2 children were on the census one year, and on the next census, none of them were listed. We looked up the wife's name, and she was no longer listed in any state, but the husband and kids were listed far away in another state with a new wife. We looked further into the disappearance of the first wife and found some very old newspaper articles saying she had died and described it as suspicious circumstances. She was not mentioned in any subsequent articles. We read into the neighbor and found that he had made an awesome recipe at his bakery that won an award for best in the state." Pretty spooky, right? But now that we've covered the history of it, that brings us to the actual recipe for murder cookies. So let's get right into it. For this recipe, you're going to need flour, salt, baking soda, ground cinnamon, ground mace, shortening, sugar, molasses, 1 egg, and some milk. Let's start with the dry ingredients. In a large bowl, combine 3½ cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2½ teaspoons of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1 teaspoon of mace. Whisk those together until fully combined. For those who don't know, mace comes from the nutmeg fruit. It is the red covering around the nutmeg seed, the actual nut of the nutmeg. Now, mace might be a little difficult to find in your area, so if you're unable to find it, substitute with 3/4 of a teaspoon of ground nutmeg and 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. You can prepare your wet ingredients in a stand mixer like I'm doing here, or use a hand mixer in a large bowl. Either one works. Either way, you're going to cream 1 cup of shortening and add to it 1½ cups of white granulated sugar slowly. Once this mixture becomes light and kind of fluffy, add a ½ cup of dark molasses. Mix for a couple seconds until fully combined, then add 1 egg. Beat that until fully combined. Now to this, you're going to want to add about half of your dry ingredients and mix them until just barely combined. Then you want to slowly stream in 1/4 cup of milk. Finish with the other half of your dry ingredients and continue to mix until fully combined. Here's what your finished dough should look like. Now we gotta shape the dough into cookies. You can use a cookie scoop or just use your hands. Either way, you're gonna want to portion it into about 1-inch diameter balls and roll the balls in a mixture of about a ½ cup of granulated sugar with 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. It doesn't have to be perfect, but after rolling, they should look something like this. We're gonna bake these cookies at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. They will look crackled on top and be lovely golden brown. Now it's time to take them out of the oven. Let them cool on the cookie sheet for a few minutes until slightly firmed up. Then move them to a wire rack to finish cooling. After cooling, they should look something like this: golden brown, crackled on top, and slightly sparkly from the sugar we rolled them in. Now this is a really good cookie. It's almost gingerbready with the amount of molasses we put in there, but it has a really lovely spicy kick from the cinnamon and mace. It's a really good cookie for around the holidays or just any time at all. This is a really solid cookie. Who knew murder could be so delicious?